I stood in the marble-floored conference room of Hartwell Creative Agency as Patricia Hartwell, the company founder, pointed her manicured finger directly at my face. Patricia's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You will apologize to my son Derek for your disrespectful behavior, or you can clean out your desk and leave." My heart pounded as I looked around the room at the shocked faces of my colleagues. Derek smirked from behind his mother, arms crossed smugly. 3 years of stolen credit, lies, and manipulation had led to this moment. I took a deep breath and made my choice. 3 years earlier, I had walked into Hartwell Creative Agency with such hope and excitement. Fresh from my master's degree in marketing communications and armed with 5 years of experience at smaller firms, I thought I had finally found my dream job. Patricia Hartwell had personally recruited me as a senior marketing strategist, promising creative freedom and the chance to work with major national brands. The agency occupied an entire floor of a gleaming downtown office building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Everything screamed success. From the imported Italian furniture to the awards lining the reception area walls. Patricia had built this empire from nothing 20 years ago, starting in her garage and growing it into a $12 million business that employed over 40 people. During my first week, I met Derek Hartwell, Patricia's 28-year-old son who held the title of creative director. With his perfectly styled brown hair, expensive suits, and easy smile, Derek seemed like the golden boy every company needed. He had an Ivy League degree hanging prominently behind his desk and spoke confidently about market trends and consumer psychology. "I'm really excited to work with someone of your caliber," Derek told me during our first official meeting. "Mom speaks very highly of your portfolio. I think we're going to make an incredible team." My first major assignment was developing a comprehensive rebranding campaign for Coastal Kitchen, a regional restaurant chain looking to expand nationally. I threw myself into the project with everything I had, conducting extensive market research, developing customer personas, and creating a complete brand identity that would resonate with their target demographic. The campaign concept centered around authentic family recipes and community connection. I designed a social media strategy that showcased real families sharing meals, developed partnerships with local food bloggers, and created an interactive website where customers could share their own family recipes. The tagline I crafted was, "Where every meal tells a story." For 6 weeks, I worked nights and weekends perfecting every detail. I presented my comprehensive strategy to Derek, walking him through each element and explaining the psychological principles behind my choices. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and praised my innovative approach. "This is exactly what Coastal Kitchen needs," Derek said, reviewing my presentation materials. "You've really captured something special here. Mind if I study this overnight before we present to the client? I want to make sure I can support your ideas effectively during the meeting." The next morning, I arrived at the office to find Derek already in the conference room with the Coastal Kitchen executives. Through the glass walls, I could see him presenting my campaign as if he had created every element himself. My tagline rolled off his tongue naturally. My carefully crafted social media strategy became his innovative thinking. My months of research transformed into his brilliant insights. When the meeting ended, the clients were ecstatic. They praised Derek's creativity and strategic thinking, awarding Hartwell Creative a $200,000 contract on the spot. Derek accepted their congratulations with a humble smile, never once mentioning my name or contributions. I confronted him immediately after the clients left, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "Derek, that was my entire campaign. Maybe this was normal in larger agencies. Maybe I was being too sensitive about ownership and credit." Over the following months, I watched Derek use this same pattern with other employees. He would request detailed briefs and strategy documents, supposedly to better understand our team's thinking. Then those ideas would mysteriously appear in his presentations to clients, refined and polished but fundamentally unchanged. Jenny Martinez, a talented graphic designer who sat in the cubicle next to mine, began confiding her frustrations during coffee breaks. I spent 2 weeks developing that entire visual identity for the Peterson Group, she whispered, glancing nervously toward Derek's office. When Derek presented it yesterday, he called it his latest creative breakthrough. I'm starting to feel invisible here. Marcus Thompson, our senior creative director who had worked at the agency for 8 years, started dropping subtle hints about his own concerns. During team meetings, he would make pointed comments about the importance of recognizing individual contributions and maintaining creative integrity. I sensed he suspected something but was being careful about how he expressed his doubts. The breaking point came when I discovered Derek's personal folder on our shared server. I had been looking for reference materials from an old project when I accidentally opened a directory labeled DH Strategic Development. Inside, I found detailed notes about my creative process, complete with timestamps and analysis of my work patterns. One document was titled Cara Strategy Replication Guidelines. It contained step-by-step instructions Derek had written to himself about how to steal and replicate my innovative approaches. He had documented my brainstorming methods, noted which types of research I relied on most heavily, and even analyzed my presentation style to better mimic my ideas when presenting them to clients. The most damaging file was a timeline showing how he had systematically planned to present my work as his own. Next to each of my project deadlines, Derek had marked dates for when he would introduce refined versions of my concepts. He had been orchestrating this theft for months, treating my creativity like a resource he could mine whenever needed. My hands trembled as I printed copies of everything, finally understanding the full scope of Derek's deception. This wasn't casual collaboration or normal agency workflow. This was calculated, premeditated theft of intellectual property, and Derek had been using his position as Patricia's son to protect himself from consequences. Armed with concrete evidence of Derek's systematic theft, I began investigating how deep his deception really went. What I discovered was far worse than I had imagined. Derek wasn't just stealing from me. He had been running an elaborate scheme that victimized multiple employees and had been going on for years. I started by reaching out to former employees who had left the agency under mysterious circumstances. The first person I contacted was Sarah Mitchell, a brilliant strategist who had supposedly quit 18 months earlier to pursue other opportunities. When I called her number, which I found in old company directories, Sarah's reaction told me everything I needed to know. "Oh my God, Cara," Sarah said, her voice heavy with recognition and pain. "You're calling about Derek, aren't you? I was wondering when someone would finally put the pieces together." Sarah agreed to meet me for coffee that weekend at a small cafe across town, far from any place where Hartwell agency employees might overhear our conversation. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. The confident, vibrant woman I remembered from company meetings had been replaced by someone who seemed guarded and defeated. "Derek destroyed my career," Sarah said quietly, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. "He used the same pattern with me that I'm sure he's using with you. First, he befriends you, makes you feel special, like you're part of his inner circle. Then he starts asking for detailed explanations of your work, supposedly to help him advocate for your ideas to his mother." Sarah explained how Derek had systematically stolen her most innovative campaigns over the course of 2 years. The Millbrook Hotel's account that had won Derek a prestigious industry award the previous year had been entirely Sarah's concept and execution. "I created that entire modern luxury, timeless service campaign," Sarah continued, her anger still fresh despite the time that had passed. "The market research, the customer journey mapping, the partnership strategy with luxury travel bloggers. Everything Derek presented to win that award came from my work. When I confronted him about it, he turned the entire situation around on me." Derek had accused Sarah of being jealous of his success and had spread rumors throughout the office that she was difficult to work with and had been stealing ideas from other team members. The projection was so perfect and so calculated that it had effectively isolated Sarah from potential allies who might have supported her. "Patricia called me into her office and told me I was creating a toxic work environment," Sarah said, tears forming in her eyes. She said Derek had shown her evidence that I was plagiarizing work from other team members. It was all fabricated, but Derek had learned how to manipulate documentation to support his lies. The most chilling part of Sarah's story was how Derek had used administrative privileges that Patricia had given him to access other employees' computers and files after hours. He would review their work, take detailed notes, and then present refined versions of their ideas before they had a chance to share them publicly. Hes not just stealing finished work, Sarah warned me. Hes studying how we think, how we create, how we solve problems. Then he replicates our processes and presents the results as his own natural talent. It's like having a creative parasite feeding off your intellectual energy. That week, I discreetly reached out to 2 other former employees who had left under similar circumstances. Both confirmed the same pattern of behavior from Derek, and both described how Patricia had actively participated in covering up her son's theft by discrediting anyone who challenged him. Meanwhile, at the office, I began noticing details that had previously seemed insignificant. Derek would arrive early some mornings and leave late certain evenings, always when he knew other team members wouldn't be around. I started documenting these patterns and realized they correlated perfectly with upcoming project deadlines for major campaigns. Jenny finally confided the full extent of her own victimization. Hes been accessing my design files for months, she whispered during a lunch break, away from the office. I started password protecting my work, but somehow he still gets in. Last week, I found draft versions of my Peterson Group designs saved in his personal folder with timestamps showing he had modified them before my official presentation. Marcus approached me carefully one afternoon, suggesting we take a walk around the block instead of talking in the office. I've been documenting irregularities for months, he admitted, once we were safely away from the building. Derek's supposed success rate doesn't match the quality of work I see him produce independently. When clients ask him detailed questions about strategy or implementation, he deflects or gives generic answers that show he doesn't really understand the underlying concepts. The most damning revelation came when Marcus showed me email records he had been quietly preserving. Derek had been sending messages to major clients taking sole credit for campaigns that had clearly been developed by other team members. In one particularly egregious example, Derek had written to the Millbrook Hotel's executive team, praising my innovative approach to luxury hospitality marketing, describing in detail the exact strategies Sarah had developed. I've been trying to figure out how to address this without destroying my own career, Marcus confessed. Patricia has made it clear that questioning Derek's contributions is considered disloyalty to the agency. But watching talented people get their work stolen and then get pushed out for complaining about it has been eating away at my conscience. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Tom Rodriguez, a junior designer who had joined the agency 6 months after me, had been secretly recording conversations with Derek after becoming suspicious of his behavior. Tom showed me audio files where Derek openly discussed how to improve ideas from other team members by presenting them more effectively. In one recording, Derek could be heard saying, "The junior staff here are good at generating raw concepts, but they don't understand how to package ideas for executive-level consumption. That's where my value comes in. I take their rough thoughts and transform them into compelling, client-ready presentations." The arrogance in Derek's voice was stunning, but what shocked me most was his casual admission that he viewed other employees as sources of material for his own advancement. He wasn't even hiding his theft anymore. He had convinced himself that refining and presenting stolen work was a legitimate skill that justified his position and salary. As I compiled this mountain of evidence, I realized that Derek had been operating this scheme since joining the agency 5 years earlier. He had systematically driven out at least 6 talented employees who had threatened his fraudulent reputation, always with Patricia's full support and protection. The agency's success wasn't built on the Hartwell family's creative genius. It was built on stolen intellectual property and the systematic exploitation of genuinely talented professionals. With overwhelming evidence of Derek's systematic theft, I knew I had to confront the situation directly. I requested a private meeting with Patricia, hoping that, as a business owner who had built her company from nothing, she would be horrified to learn about her son's fraudulent behavior and would take immediate action to correct the situation. Patricia's corner office was a shrine to the agency's supposed achievements. Awards and accolades covered every wall, many of them recognizing campaigns that I now knew had been stolen from employees who had been pushed out or silenced. As I sat across from her imposing mahogany desk, I carefully presented the evidence I had gathered, starting with the documentation I had found in Derek's personal files. Patricia, I have discovered some very serious issues that I need to bring to your attention, I began, my voice steady despite my racing heartbeat. Derek has been systematically stealing work from team members and presenting it as his own. I have documentation, timeline evidence, and witness testimonies that prove this has been happening for years. I laid out the printed emails, the file timestamps, the recordings Tom had made, and the testimonies from former employees. For 45 minutes, I methodically walked through each piece of evidence, explaining how Derek's award-winning campaigns had actually been created by other people and stolen through his administrative access to company systems. Patricia listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished presenting my case, she sat back in her leather chair and was quiet for a long, uncomfortable moment. Finally, she spoke, and her words shattered any hope I had for justice or accountability. Cara, I'm disappointed in you, she said, her tone cold and dismissive. What you're describing isn't theft. It's leadership. Derek's job as creative director is to oversee, refine, and improve the work produced by his team. The fact that he takes raw ideas and transforms them into award-winning campaigns shows exactly the kind of strategic thinking that makes him so valuable to this agency. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Patricia, these weren't rough ideas that needed refinement. These were complete, finished campaigns that Derek presented without any acknowledgement of the actual creators. Sarah Mitchell's Millbrook Hotels campaign was stolen in its entirety. Sarah Mitchell was a disruptive employee who couldn't handle working in a collaborative environment, Patricia replied sharply. She had difficulty accepting feedback and became jealous when Derek's refinements of her initial concepts received recognition. Her attitude became so toxic that I had no choice but to let her go. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Patricia systematically dismissing every piece of evidence I presented. She had an explanation for everything. Derek's late-night access to files was him going above and beyond to understand his team's work. His failure to credit other employees was maintaining professional presentation standards that clients expect. His pattern of driving out talented staff was simply natural turnover in a competitive industry. As our meeting progressed, I began to understand a horrifying truth. Patricia had known about Derek's theft all along and had been actively covering for him. This wasn't willful blindness or maternal bias clouding her judgment. This was calculated complicity in her son's fraud. Derek's father built the foundation of this business before he passed away 10 years ago, Patricia said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. Derek represents the continuation of our family legacy. He has natural leadership abilities and an instinctive understanding of what clients need. The fact that he can take disparate ideas from team members and synthesize them into coherent, successful campaigns is a gift, not a crime. When I pressed harder, presenting the audio recordings where Derek openly discussed his theft, Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. You need to understand something. Cara, Derek is the future of this agency. Employees like you are valuable, but you're also replaceable. Derek is not. If you can't accept the way we operate here, perhaps this isn't the right environment for your career growth. The meeting took a sinister turn when Patricia revealed the full extent of their preparation for this moment. She pulled out a thick legal folder and placed it on the desk between us. Derek mentioned that you might have some concerns about project attribution, she said with a cold smile. So I had our legal team review your employment contract and your contributions to the agency. According to our intellectual property clauses, any work you create while employed here belongs to the company. not to you personally. Derek, as creative director, has full authority to present and modify that work as he sees fit. I stared at the legal documents, realizing they had been anticipating this confrontation and had prepared a defense strategy in advance. Patricia continued, her voice becoming more threatening with each sentence. Furthermore, our investigation has revealed some concerning patterns in your behavior. You've been accessing other employees' files without authorization, removing company documents from the premises, and conducting meetings with former employees to discuss confidential agency business. This constitutes potential corporate espionage and breach of your confidentiality agreement. My hands were shaking now. They were turning the entire situation around, making me the criminal for exposing Derek's theft. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes cold and calculating. Here's what's going to happen, Cara. You have a choice to make. You can apologize publicly to Derek for your accusations and your unprofessional conduct. You can sign this amended confidentiality agreement that prevents you from discussing internal agency operations with anyone outside this company. And you can commit to working collaboratively within our established creative framework. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle before delivering the final blow. Or, you can clean out your desk today and leave immediately. If you choose to leave, we will be forced to pursue legal action against you for theft of proprietary information, violation of your confidentiality agreement, and potential defamation of company leadership. We have documented evidence of your unauthorized access to company files and your discussions with former employees. Our legal team is confident we can not only destroy your reputation in this industry, but also recover significant damages for the disruption you've caused. The room felt like it was spinning. I had come here expecting justice and accountability, only to find myself trapped in an elaborate system designed to protect Derek's fraud and silence anyone who threatened to expose it. Patricia and Derek had turned the agency into their personal empire, built on stolen creativity and maintained through intimidation and legal threats. I need time to think about this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You have until 5 o'clock today, Patricia replied. Either you apologize to Derek in front of the entire staff and sign these agreements, or you leave permanently. There is no third option. As I walked back to my desk in a daze, I realized that Derek had been watching the entire confrontation through Patricia's office windows. When I made eye contact with him, he gave me that same smug smile I had seen 100 times before, the expression of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions and never expected to. Jenny and Tom could see something was wrong, but the office suddenly felt like enemy territory where any conversation might be monitored and used against me. Marcus caught my eye from across the room and nodded slightly, a gesture that told me he understood what had happened and supported whatever decision I was about to make. As I sat at my desk, staring at 3 years of work that would soon be credited to Derek Hartwell's genius, I faced the most important choice of my professional life. I could submit to their demands, sign away my rights, and continue working in a system designed to steal my creativity. Or I could walk away from everything I had built and fight for my integrity, knowing they had the resources and ruthlessness to try destroying my career. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. I had spent too many years building my skills and reputation to hand them over to a fraud and his enabler. At exactly 4:57 that afternoon, I gathered my personal belongings, walked into that marble conference room where this nightmare had started, and gave them my answer. The moment I walked into that conference room for the final confrontation, I knew I was about to change the trajectory of my life forever. Patricia and Derek were waiting for me. Along with several key staff members they had summoned as witnesses to what they clearly expected to be my public humiliation and submission. Well, Cara, Patricia asked, her voice dripping with false patience, have you made your decision? Are you ready to apologize to Derek and move forward as a productive member of our team? I looked around the room at my colleagues, many of whom had been victims of Derek's theft without even realizing it. Jenny sat nervously at the conference table, her portfolio of stolen designs scattered in front of her. Tom fidgeted with his pen, knowing his recordings had helped expose the truth but unsure what consequences awaited him. Marcus stood against the far wall, his expression supportive but cautious. "I have made my decision," I said clearly, making sure my voice carried to every corner of the room. "I will not be apologizing to Derek because I have done nothing wrong. Derek has been systematically stealing work from employees for years, and instead of addressing this theft, you've chosen to protect and enable it." The silence in the room was deafening. Derek's smug expression faltered for just a moment before his mother stepped in to regain control. "Cara, you're making a serious mistake," Patricia warned. "Our legal team is prepared to pursue action against you for defamation and corporate sabotage." "Let them," I replied, feeling a strange sense of liberation wash over me. "The truth isn't defamation, and exposing fraud isn't sabotage. I'm resigning effective immediately, and I'll be taking my integrity with me." I had prepared a brief speech for this moment, but looking at the faces around me, I realized simple honesty would be more powerful than any carefully crafted statement. To everyone in this room who has watched their ideas mysteriously appear in Derek's presentations, you're not imagining things. To everyone who has been told they're not creative enough or strategic enough while watching Derek win awards for their work, you deserve better. And to anyone who's been considering leaving because they feel undervalued and overlooked, now you know why. Patricia's face flushed red with anger, but before she could respond, I continued. "I won't be signing any agreements that prevent me from discussing what I've witnessed here. The truth has a way of coming out, and when it does, I hope each of you will remember this moment and ask yourselves whether this is the kind of environment where you want to build your careers." With that, I walked out of Hartwell Creative Agency forever, carrying nothing but my personal belongings and my professional dignity. The elevator ride down seemed to last an eternity, and when I finally stepped onto the sidewalk outside, I felt like I could breathe freely for the first time in months. The immediate aftermath of my departure unfolded faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within hours of my resignation, the carefully constructed facade that had protected Derek's fraud began to crumble. My first indication that something was happening came in a phone call from Linda Morrison, the marketing director at Coastal Kitchen, the restaurant chain where my career at Hartwell had effectively ended when Derek stole my campaign. "Cara, I hope you don't mind me calling your personal number," Linda said, her voice filled with concern. "I heard through the industry grapevine that you left Hartwell today, and I wanted to reach out immediately. We've been working with Derek on the expansion phase of our campaign, and frankly, we're confused about some major inconsistencies in the strategic direction." Linda explained that Derek had been unable to answer specific questions about the campaign's psychological foundations and target demographic analysis. When pressed for details about why certain creative choices had been made, Derek had given generic responses that showed a fundamental misunderstanding of the strategy I had developed. "The person who created our original campaign clearly understood our brand identity and customer psychology on a deep level," Linda continued. "But when we asked Derek to explain his thinking behind specific elements, his answers don't match the sophisticated analysis we received initially. It's almost like two different people worked on this project." I thanked Linda for calling and suggested she contact Hartwell directly with her concerns, knowing that Derek would be completely unable to provide the detailed strategic rationale that clients expected. Within 24 hours, Coastal Kitchen had requested an emergency meeting to discuss the future of their account. The second crisis emerged from an unexpected source. Dr. James Peterson, the CEO of Peterson Group, a medical device company whose rebranding Jenny had designed, called Hartwell, requesting specific modifications to their visual identity. The changes he wanted required someone who understood the original design philosophy and could maintain consistency with the established brand guidelines. Derek, who had presented Jenny's work as his own breakthrough creative vision, was completely unprepared for the client's technical requests. When Dr. Peterson asked for adjustments to color palettes and typography that would preserve the psychological impact of the original designer's choices, Derek had no idea what he was talking about. According to Jenny, who heard about the disaster secondhand from other staff members, Derek spent 45 minutes in a conference call with Peterson Group executives trying to fake his way through technical design questions he couldn't answer. The call ended with Dr. Peterson expressing serious concerns about Hartwell's ability to maintain the quality and consistency of work they had been promised. Meanwhile, Marcus had begun his own investigation into the agency's recent client relationships and financial performance. What he discovered painted a troubling picture of an organization that had been coasting on stolen creativity while actual business fundamentals deteriorated. 3 of our major clients have reduced their contract renewals in the past 6 months. Marcus confided during a coffee meeting the weekend after my resignation. When I reviewed the client feedback reports, there's a consistent pattern of complaints about strategic inconsistency and lack of depth in campaign development. Derek's been presenting stolen work so effectively that clients expected a level of strategic thinking he simply can't deliver on an ongoing basis. The most damaging blow came from an unexpected source, Derek himself. Under pressure from multiple client crises and lacking the intellectual foundation to address their concerns, Derek made a critical error during a video conference with Millbrook Hotels, the account that had earned him industry recognition using Sarah's stolen work. According to Tom, who was present for the meeting, Derek became flustered when the Millbrook executives asked detailed questions about expanding their campaign to international markets. The client wanted to understand how the original modern luxury, timeless service concept could be adapted for different cultural contexts and customer expectations. Derek started talking in circles. Tom told me, shaking his head in amazement. Then he said something like, "Let me check with the original strategist who developed the cultural analysis framework." As soon as the words left his mouth, you could see him realize what he had just admitted. The clients went completely silent. The Millbrook executives had reasonable questions about Derek's statement. If he was the creative genius behind their award-winning campaign, why did he need to consult with someone else about his own strategic framework? The confusion led to an uncomfortable series of follow-up questions that Derek couldn't answer without further exposing his fraudulent claims. Within a week of my departure, 2 major clients had requested emergency meetings to discuss their concerns about strategic continuity, and a third had quietly begun exploring options with competing agencies. The empire that Patricia and Derek had built on stolen creativity was already showing structural cracks that threatened its foundation. But the most significant consequence of my departure wasn't immediately visible to anyone at Hartwell. Jenny and Tom, inspired by my willingness to walk away rather than submit to corruption, had begun their own quiet discussions about the future of their careers. Marcus, who had been documenting irregularities for months, finally felt empowered to take his evidence to appropriate authorities. The dominoes were in motion, and Derek's complete dependence on others' creativity was about to be exposed to everyone who had believed in his manufactured reputation. Patricia's grand plan to protect her son by silencing me had instead created the catalyst for his complete professional destruction. While Derek and Patricia thought they had successfully eliminated their biggest threat by forcing out my voice of dissent, my departure had actually triggered a chain reaction that neither of them had anticipated. Within 2 weeks, their carefully constructed empire of stolen creativity was collapsing from multiple directions simultaneously. The first major blow came from an unexpected alliance between current and former employees. Sarah Mitchell, emboldened by my willingness to speak publicly about Derek's theft, had contacted a labor attorney named Rebecca Chen, who specialized in intellectual property fraud and workplace retaliation cases. When Sarah first contacted my office 6 months ago, she didn't feel ready to pursue legal action. Rebecca explained during our initial consultation, "But your resignation and the evidence you've gathered has given us the foundation for a comprehensive whistleblower lawsuit that could expose the full scope of this fraud." Rebecca had been quietly building a case against Hartwell Creative Agency, documenting the systematic theft of intellectual property and the pattern of retaliation against employees who challenged Derek's fraudulent claims. My resignation provided the final piece she needed. a current employee with detailed documentation who was willing to testify publicly about the corruption. Intellectual property theft in creative industries is notoriously difficult to prosecute, Rebecca continued. But Derek and Patricia made several critical errors that give us solid legal ground. The most damaging evidence is Derek's own documentation of his theft process. Courts love paper trails, and he's provided us with a detailed confession of premeditated fraud. Within days of our meeting, 3 more former Hartwell employees had contacted Rebecca's office with similar stories. Michael Torres, a copywriter who had left the agency 18 months earlier, provided evidence that Derek had stolen his campaign concepts for a national electronics retailer. Lisa Park, a former digital marketing specialist, had documentation showing that Derek had presented her social media strategies to multiple clients without attribution. The legal momentum was building rapidly, but the most immediate damage to Hartwell's reputation came from the business journalism community. Amanda Rodriguez, an investigative reporter for the city's premier business journal, had been tracking the unusual pattern of talent exodus from successful creative agencies. I started noticing that several award-winning agencies had experienced significant staff turnover immediately after major client wins. Amanda explained when she called to request an interview. When I began investigating the connection between creative recognition and employee departures, Hartwell Creative kept appearing in my research. Amanda had independently identified the same patterns that I had discovered internally. Talented employees would join Hartwell, contribute to major campaign successes, and then leave under mysterious circumstances within months of their most significant achievements. The timing was too consistent to be coincidental. What made your case particularly compelling was the contradiction between Derek's public reputation and the actual timeline of creative development, Amanda continued. Industry databases show that Derek's award-winning campaigns were all developed during periods when specific employees were working on those exact accounts. When those employees left, Derek's creative output became noticeably generic and derivative. Meanwhile, at Hartwell itself, the crisis was escalating beyond Patricia's ability to control the narrative. Derek's inability to handle client questions about strategic foundations had exposed his fundamental ignorance about the work he had been claiming as his own for years. The Millbrook Hotels account, which had been Derek's crown jewel achievement, became the source of his most humiliating professional failure. The client had requested a comprehensive strategy session to plan their expansion into European markets, expecting Derek to adapt his innovative luxury hospitality framework for different cultural contexts. Marcus, who was required to attend the meeting as senior creative director, later described Derek's performance as catastrophic. Derek spent the first 20 minutes trying to stall by asking the clients to explain their expansion goals. Marcus told me during one of our regular coffee meetings, when they pressed him for strategic recommendations, he started repeating generic marketing buzzwords that had nothing to do with the specific challenges of international luxury hospitality. The Millbrook executives became increasingly frustrated as Derek failed to demonstrate any understanding of the psychological principles that had made their original campaign so effective. When they asked him to explain how experiential luxury positioning could be adapted for German business travelers versus Italian leisure tourists, Derek's response revealed his complete ignorance of the strategic framework I had developed. He actually suggested using the exact same messaging and visual approach for all European markets. Marcus continued, shaking his head in amazement. These are sophisticated clients who understand international marketing. They immediately recognized that Derek had no idea what he was talking about. The meeting ended with Millbrook Hotels terminating their contract with Hartwell Creative Agency, effective immediately. They cited fundamental concerns about strategic competency and creative leadership in their formal notice of cancellation. The loss of their largest client sent shockwaves through the agency and triggered immediate financial stress. But Derek's professional humiliation was far from over. Dr. Peterson from Peterson Group, frustrated by Derek's inability to handle basic design modifications, had hired an independent consultant to review their rebranding project. The consultant's analysis revealed striking similarities between their visual identity and award-winning designs from other industries, suggesting that the original creative vision Derek had claimed wasn't original at all. When you steal other people's creative processes but don't understand the underlying principles, the consultant noted in her report, you end up with designs that look sophisticated but lack the strategic foundation necessary for long-term brand development. Peterson Group demanded a full refund of their design fees and threatened legal action if Hartwell didn't immediately address what they called misrepresentation of creative capabilities. Patricia was forced to return nearly $100,000 in fees to avoid a public lawsuit that would have exposed Derek's fraud to the entire industry. The most devastating blow, however, came from within the agency itself. Jenny and Tom, inspired by my example and emboldened by the mounting evidence of Derek's incompetence, had made the decision to resign simultaneously and join the growing whistleblower lawsuit. We can't continue working for people who steal our creativity and then threaten us when we object. Jenny announced during a staff meeting that Patricia had called to address the client crisis. Tom and I have been documenting Derek's theft for months, and we're prepared to testify about what we've witnessed here. Their resignations triggered a mass exodus that Patricia couldn't prevent. Within 48 hours, 6 more employees had submitted their notice, citing concerns about ethical leadership and creative integrity. The agency that had employed over 40 people was suddenly operating with a skeleton crew of terrified junior staff and managers who were too close to retirement to risk changing jobs. Marcus, who had been with the agency for 8 years, delivered the final blow during his own resignation meeting with Patricia. I've spent months trying to protect this company's reputation while hoping you would address Derek's behavior internally, he said. According to Tom, who overheard the conversation from the adjacent office, but your decision to attack Cara instead of confronting the truth showed me that this corruption comes from the very top of the organization. Marcus revealed that he had been preserving documentation of Derek's theft for over a year, including email records, client communications, and financial irregularities that showed how stolen campaigns had been artificially inflating the agency's success metrics. His evidence would prove that Derek's fraud had cost the agency several major clients who had discovered inconsistencies in their campaign development. As news of the mass resignations spread through the industry, Hartwell's remaining clients began questioning whether the agency still had the talent and leadership necessary to handle their accounts. The carefully crafted image of Derek as a rising creative genius was crumbling, and Patricia's reputation as a business leader was being destroyed by her decision to enable and protect her son's fraud. The empire they had built on stolen creativity was collapsing faster than either of them had thought possible, and the legal and professional consequences were just beginning to unfold. By the end of my 3rd week away from Hartwell, the agency was in complete freefall. What had started as a simple resignation had evolved into an industry-wide scandal that was destroying reputations, triggering lawsuits, and exposing years of systematic fraud to public scrutiny. The breaking point came when Amanda Rodriguez published her investigative piece in the Metro Business Journal. The article, titled "The Creative Theft Crisis at Hartwell Agency: How Stolen Ideas Built a Fraudulent Empire," laid out the entire scope of Derek's deception with devastating precision. Amanda had interviewed 8 former employees, reviewed hundreds of pages of documentation, and consulted with intellectual property experts to present an irrefutable case against Derek and Patricia. The article included side-by-side comparisons of original employee work and Derek's subsequent presentations, showing identical concepts, strategies, and even specific language that had been stolen wholesale. The evidence suggests a systematic pattern of intellectual property theft spanning at least 5 years. Amanda wrote, Derek Hartwell, son of agency founder Patricia Hartwell, appears to have built his entire reputation on work stolen from subordinates, with active support and protection from senior management who retaliated against employees who raised concerns. The article's impact was immediate and devastating. Within hours of publication, Hartwell's stock price, which had gone public 2 years earlier during the height of Derek's fraudulent success, plummeted by 60%. Investors who had believed they were backing a creative genius realized they had funded an elaborate fraud scheme. But the most damaging revelation in Amanda's article wasn't about the theft itself. It was about the systematic intimidation campaign that Patricia and Derek had used to silence victims. The article detailed how employees had been threatened with legal action, had their professional reputations attacked, and had been forced to sign restrictive confidentiality agreements to prevent them from exposing the truth. This wasn't simply a case of unclear creative attribution, Amanda concluded. The collapse happened during a hastily arranged board meeting with Hartwell's investors, who demanded immediate explanations for the allegations in Amanda's article. Patricia had hoped that Derek could present a coherent defense of his work and reputation, but 3 years of depending on stolen creativity had left him completely unprepared for genuine scrutiny. Derek walked into that conference room thinking he could charm his way through the crisis like he had done with clients for years. Marcus later told me, having heard details from several people who witnessed the meeting. But when the investors started asking specific questions about his creative process and strategic thinking, he just fell apart. Derek began by denying the allegations and attacking the credibility of former employees, but the investors had read Amanda's article carefully and had brought specific questions about campaign development timelines and creative attribution. When they asked Derek to explain the strategic foundation of his award-winning Millbrook Hotels campaign, his answers revealed that he didn't understand the basic principles behind the work he had stolen from Sarah. The investors weren't creative professionals who could be fooled by Derek's smooth presentation style. Marcus continued, "These were business people who understood intellectual property, timeline analysis, and documentation standards. They could see immediately that Derek was making up answers to questions about his own supposed work." The meeting deteriorated rapidly as Derek became increasingly desperate to defend himself. According to multiple witnesses, he began contradicting his own previous statements, admitted to collaborating closely with team members in ways that undermined his claims of individual creativity, and finally broke down completely when asked to produce original sketches or strategic notes from his major campaigns. Derek started crying and blaming everyone else for his situation. One investor later told Amanda Rodriguez for a follow-up article. He said his mother had pressured him to live up to impossible expectations and that the former employees were trying to destroy him out of jealousy. It was clear that he had never taken responsibility for his own actions and couldn't handle being exposed. The most damaging moment came when Derek, in his desperation, revealed the full scope of his dependence on others' work. "I never claimed to create everything myself," he said. According to the meeting transcript that later became part of the legal proceedings, "I thought my job was to improve and present the ideas that team members brought to me. I didn't realize that was considered stealing." His admission confirmed everything that former employees had been saying for months. Derek didn't just steal specific campaigns. He had never learned how to develop original creative work because he had been relying on theft from the beginning of his career. Patricia's attempt to salvage the situation only made things worse. She stood up during the meeting and delivered an angry defense of Derek that revealed her complete complicity in his fraud. "Derek is a natural leader who has been unfairly targeted by disgruntled former employees," she declared. According to witnesses, the creative industry has always involved collaboration and refinement of ideas. These accusations are being driven by people who couldn't handle working in a competitive environment. Her denial flew in the face of overwhelming evidence that the investors had reviewed before the meeting. When board member Janet Sullivan asked Patricia directly whether she had been aware of Derek's theft and retaliation against employees, Patricia's answer destroyed any remaining credibility. "I protect my family and my business," Patricia said. "Derek's success has made this agency profitable and respected. If some employees couldn't accept our collaborative creative process, that's their limitation, not our fault." The meeting ended with the board voting unanimously to suspend both Derek and Patricia from their leadership roles pending a full investigation. Within hours, news of their suspension had spread throughout the industry, confirming that the crisis at Hartwell was far worse than even the most damaging speculation. The legal consequences were swift and severe. Rebecca Chen filed a comprehensive whistleblower lawsuit on behalf of 8 former employees, seeking damages for stolen intellectual property, wrongful termination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit included detailed documentation of Derek's theft, Patricia's complicity, and the financial harm caused to employees whose careers had been damaged by the retaliation campaign. But the most devastating consequence was the complete destruction of Derek's professional reputation. Industry professionals who had respected his supposed talent began reviewing his work with new eyes, recognizing the sophisticated strategic thinking that Derek could never have produced independently. Award committees launched investigations into his previous recognitions, and several honors were formally rescinded when the theft was confirmed. Within 6 weeks of my resignation, Hartwell Creative Agency had lost 70% of its client base, nearly all of its talented employees, and the trust of the entire industry. The $12 million empire that Patricia had built over 20 years was collapsing because she had chosen to protect her son's fraud rather than maintain the integrity that had originally made the business successful. Derek's attempt to destroy my career for exposing his theft had instead destroyed his own reputation so completely that no reputable agency would consider hiring him. The golden boy who had never faced consequences for his actions was finally experiencing the accountability he had avoided for his entire adult life. 6 months after walking out of Hartwell Creative Agency, I was sitting in a corner office on the 32nd floor of the Metropolitan Tower, overlooking the city skyline that had once seemed so distant from my cubicle at Derek's fraudulent empire. My new business cards read, Cara Mitchell, Vice President of Strategic Development, Blackstone Creative Group, and I still felt a sense of amazement every time I saw my name associated with the most prestigious marketing agency in the region. Blackstone Creative had recruited me aggressively after the scandal at Hartwell broke, recognizing that my strategic thinking and ethical standards represented exactly the kind of leadership they wanted to cultivate. The signing bonus alone was more than I had earned in an entire year working under Derek's theft regime, but more importantly, I was finally working with people who valued original thinking and gave credit where it was deserved. My first major project at Blackstone was leading the strategic development for Millbrook Hotel's international expansion, the exact campaign that Derek had humiliated himself trying to fake during his final client meeting. When Linda Morrison from Coastal Kitchen learned that I had joined Blackstone, she immediately transferred their account as well, citing her confidence in my strategic abilities and her relief at finally working with the actual creator of their successful rebranding. We always knew there was something special about our original campaign strategy, Linda told me during our transition meeting. Working with Derek afterward felt like talking to someone who was reading from a script he didn't understand. Having you back as our strategic lead feels like coming home. The professional vindication was deeply satisfying, but the personal growth I experienced during those months was even more meaningful. Standing up to Derek and Patricia's intimidation had taught me that integrity wasn't just about doing the right thing when it was easy. It was about maintaining your principles when the cost seemed unbearable. Meanwhile, the legal resolution of the Hartwell scandal exceeded even Rebecca Chen's most optimistic expectations. The whistleblower lawsuit had grown to include 12 former employees, and the evidence of systematic intellectual property theft was so overwhelming that Patricia's attorneys advised immediate settlement rather than risking a public trial. The financial settlement provided significant compensation for all affected employees, but more importantly, it included a public acknowledgement of Derek's theft and Patricia's complicity. The settlement agreement required Hartwell to publish formal apologies to each victim, acknowledging their contributions to campaigns that had been wrongfully attributed to Derek. Cara Mitchell was the primary creative strategist behind the Coastal Kitchen campaign that won our 2023 Industry Excellence Award. Read Patricia's public statement, which was published in the same business journal that had exposed their fraud. We acknowledge that Mr. Hartwell's previous claims of individual creative responsibility were inaccurate and apologize for any harm caused to Miss Mitchell's professional reputation. Similar statements were issued for Sarah, Jenny, Tom, and all the other employees whose work had been stolen. The public vindication meant that potential employers and clients could clearly see that our departures from Hartwell had been principled stands against corruption, not performance issues or creative limitations. The most profound transformation, however, occurred within Derek himself. The complete collapse of his fraudulent reputation had forced him to confront the reality of his situation in ways that years of enablement and protection had prevented. 6 months after his suspension from Hartwell, Derek reached out to me through his therapist, requesting a meeting to make a personal apology. I was initially skeptical about his motivations, but Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the psychologist he had been working with, assured me that Derek's remorse was genuine and that the apology was part of his recovery process, rather than another manipulation attempt. We met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, far from any place where we might encounter former colleagues or industry professionals. Derek looked completely different from the arrogant, entitled man who had smirked at me during my final confrontation with Patricia. The expensive suits had been replaced by simple jeans and a button-down shirt. His perfectly styled hair was longer and less formal. Most importantly, his expression carried a humility and self-awareness that I had never seen before. "Cara, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I understand what I did to you and to everyone else," Derek began, his voice quiet and sincere. "I stole your work, I damaged your reputation, and I participated in trying to destroy your career when you stood up for yourself. There's no excuse for what I did, and I take full responsibility for the harm I caused." Derek explained that his year of therapy had helped him understand how his fear of failure and desperation to live up to his father's legacy had led him to justify increasingly serious ethical violations. I convinced myself that refining other people's ideas was a legitimate skill, but I knew I was lying. Every time I presented your work or Sarah's work or anyone else's work as my own, I knew exactly what I was doing. The most significant part of Derek's apology was his acknowledgement of how his actions had affected others' lives and careers. "You had to leave a job you loved and fight to rebuild your reputation because I was too cowardly to admit that I wasn't the creative genius my mother wanted me to be. Sarah's career was set back by years because I stole her best work and then destroyed her credibility when she tried to speak up." Derek had accepted an entry-level position at a small agency across town, where he was learning basic creative skills under close supervision. "I'm 29 years old, and am finally learning how to actually do the job I claim to be an expert at," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "It's humbling, but it's honest. For the first time in my adult life, I'm earning my salary through my own work instead of stealing from others." His therapist had helped him understand that his mother's enabling and protection had prevented him from developing genuine confidence and competence. Patricia meant well, but she created a system that encouraged my worst instincts and prevented me from ever learning accountability. The scandal was devastating, but it was also the wake-up call I needed to become an actual human being. Patricia's own transformation was equally dramatic, though it took longer for her to accept responsibility for her role in the corruption. The collapse of Hartwell Creative had forced her to confront the reality that her protection of Derek had not only enabled his theft, but had also destroyed the business she had spent 20 years building. "I thought I was protecting my family legacy, but I was actually destroying it," Patricia admitted during a private meeting she had requested to discuss the settlement terms. "My husband built this business on principles of creativity and integrity. By covering for Derek's theft, I betrayed everything he stood for." Patricia had been forced to sell the remains of Hartwell Creative at a massive loss to pay legal fees and settlement costs. The agency that had once been worth $12 million was dissolved, with its remaining assets used to compensate victims and creditors. Patricia was now working as a consultant for small businesses, slowly rebuilding her reputation through honest work and genuine service to clients. The industry-wide impact of the scandal extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Professional organizations implemented new standards for protecting intellectual property and recognizing creative contributions. Several agencies updated their employment contracts to prevent the kind of systematic theft that Derek had orchestrated, and industry publications began regularly featuring articles about ethical leadership and creative integrity. My own career had not only recovered but had flourished in ways I couldn't have imagined while trapped under Derek's theft regime. At Blackstone, I was leading strategy development for major national brands, mentoring junior staff members, and contributing to industry discussions about creative ethics and professional development. The most rewarding aspect of my new role was the opportunity to mentor young professionals who were facing challenges similar to what I had experienced at Hartwell. I started a monthly workshop series called Creative Integrity in Practice, where I shared my story and provided guidance for employees who were dealing with workplace theft, credit attribution issues, or ethical dilemmas. Your experience shows that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it, said Jennifer Adams, a young strategist who had attended several of my workshops. Knowing that someone with your success fought back against corruption and won gives me hope that integrity really does matter in this industry. The most profound life lesson from my ordeal was understanding that authentic success requires authentic effort. Derek's stolen achievements had seemed impressive on the surface, but they were ultimately hollow because they weren't connected to genuine skill or understanding. When the facade collapsed, there was nothing substantial underneath to support him. In contrast, the work I had done honestly, even when it wasn't properly credited, became the foundation for genuine professional growth and recognition. The strategic thinking I had developed while creating campaigns for Coastal Kitchen and other clients translated directly into the advanced responsibilities I was handling at Blackstone. Real creativity can't be stolen, I often tell the professionals I mentor. Someone can steal your ideas, your presentations, even your client relationships, but they can't steal your ability to think strategically, solve problems, and develop new concepts. That intellectual foundation belongs to you permanently, and it's what will carry you through any career challenge. The ultimate irony of Derek's theft scheme was that by stealing my work, he had prevented himself from developing the genuine skills that would have made theft unnecessary. If he had spent those years learning from my strategic approach instead of simply copying my results, he might have become the creative professional he was pretending to be. Today, as I look out at the city from my office at Blackstone Creative, I feel grateful for every aspect of my journey, including the painful confrontation that forced me to choose between comfort and integrity. Walking away from Hartwell wasn't just about exposing Derek's fraud, it was about refusing to participate in a system that devalued honest work and punished principled behavior. The empire that Patricia and Derek built on stolen creativity ultimately crumbled because it had no authentic foundation to support it. When the theft was exposed and the victims found their voices, the entire structure collapsed under the weight of its own dishonesty. But from that collapse came something much more valuable: a renewed commitment throughout the industry to recognize and protect creative integrity, and the knowledge that standing up for what's right, even when the cost seems unbearable, is always the path to genuine success and personal peace. My story proves that you don't have to accept toxic workplace behavior, even when it comes from people with power and resources. You don't have to sign away your dignity to keep a job. And you don't have to let fear prevent you from speaking truth to corruption. Sometimes, walking away from what seems like everything is actually the first step toward finding where you truly belong. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced workplace theft or been pressured to stay silent about corruption? How do you think companies can better protect employees who speak up about unethical behavior? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for integrity in challenging situations. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might need encouragement to speak their truth, even when it feels impossible. Thank you for listening, and remember that your authentic voice and genuine work are always worth protecting. No matter what challenges you face, the truth has a way of prevailing, and integrity always finds its reward, even when the path seems uncertain.